Hi there, this is the third movie for the 8th lecture on comparative literature for the first semester, presented by Sumio Umekawa with my old picture. This is when I was probably 4th grader or 5th grader at the wedding of my relatives. So this third movie is actually follows the second movie for the first lecture, in which I talked about the rough history of poems. And now we're going to move on to the rough history of novels in this third part. So today, Chinese word 小说 indicates so-called narrated stories. But the term originally indicates small talks in historiography, and it was a rendition for a genre. Such small talks turned to be another genre in Six Dynasties period and started to be called weird stories. 志怪 in Chinese actually indicate telling the weird things, and it was a kind of record rather than stories of something strange. The weird story had a smaller subcategory in it, which was called 生形小说, the transcendent story. If the record focuses on something strange, which has something to do with transcendent or transcendental utopias, it was falling into transcendent story in the wider category of the weird story. So transcendent story can be said as a part of the weird story. For instance, the tale of Weird Tiger, which later was retold by Japanese author Nakajima Atsushi as The Moon Over the Mountain, falls in the category of weird story. Meanwhile, the record of the village of peach blossoms by Dao Yingming, the famous story which engendered the term utopia with peach blossoms, should be regarded as a transcendent story of the weird story. But when it came to the Tang Dynasty, the weird story transformed itself a bit and started to be categorized as 传记, the rare stories. Although both the weird and rare stories tell us something strange, the latter shows the stronger focus onto the rareness rather than strangeness. In addition, the rare story started to include romantic features, whereas the weird story remained as a mere record of strange events. For instance, Bai Xinjian, the younger brother of famous Bai Juyi's story of Li Wa, and Yuan Zhen, the best friend of Bai Juyi's story Ying Ying, can be two representative rare stories of the Tang period. As Yuan Zhen's story of Ying Ying was later transformed into a famous script called Xi Xianji, the latter might be more famous in China. The interesting point of these two articles is both stories were compiled on the same basis of an event which happened in the reality. Both of them narrate the real love romance between Yuan Zhen and a prostitute woman who was spoiled by Yuan Zhen at the end. Although in Bai Xinjian's story, the hero and heroine were separated at the end, just like what happened in reality, in Yuan Zhen's story, they got married. When we think about the flow of narratives, it should be noted that the Song period witnessed a flourishment of gathering called Jiangtan, the gathering to listen to the storytelling. So far as we know, there existed 4 different types of gathering of this kind. One was called 小说, in which audience listened to the weird stories and rare stories. The second one was called 说清, in which possibly monks told the Buddhist episodes or teachings in a very easy way. The third one was called 讲释, in which episodes or stories written in historiographies, like Three Kingdoms or the Record of Han, were told. And the first one was called Hushen, for which we actually do not know many things. Some scholars assume this could have been a gathering to listen to the comedy. Anyway, with the great popularity of such gathering, people started to record the told stories at the gathering. Given that two speakers had talked about the Three Kingdoms, if the speaker A had a very good reaction from the audience for the Battle of the Red Cliff, he would expand the part for his next occasion. Whereas the speaker B had applause at the death of Guan Yu, he would add more episodes about the event by cutting the story of the Red Cliff. Therefore, stories told at the gathering differed in accordance with time, audience, and occasion. But sometimes audience might require the very same story told by, for instance, John Lennon, but this time by Paul McCartney. In order to answer this kind of request, the record of the told stories seemed to have started. As the story was told by the speaker, the record of it was written in oral language. Thus, it was the emergence of something called huaben, the record written in oral language. Chinese literature by that time had been written in written language, which was quite different from spoken oral one. Although huaben was, as I said, the mere record of told stories at the gatherings, some writers started to write narratives in the form of huaben in the oral languages from the beginning. This was another emergence of something called paihua literature, meaning literature written in oral languages at the first place. As the speaker changed the details of story in accordance with time, audience, and occasion, the popularity of the gathering for storytelling also accelerated the flourishment of so-called second creation. The popular and famous stories were rewritten, re-edited, and recreated by many different authors again and again. And after the repetition of second creations, some stories survived. For instance, one of the bases for the Journey to the West was a poetic story of Sanzang of the Great Town going to get sutras. It was one of the surviving second creation of the record of the West of the Great Town, recorded by Xuanzang, the model of Tripitaka himself. For another instance, a plain story of Three Kingdoms is also one of the bases for the story of Three Kingdoms we know today, which was also the second creation of the historiography, the Book of Three Kingdoms. Such repeated creation of second, third, and possibly hundreds creations of stories was followed by the Ming period, when we see the completion of second creations as the emergence of four great rare stories of the Ming period. Four great rare stories usually include Water Margin, Three Kingdoms, The Journey to the West, and The Golden Lotus. But sometimes concealing deities or investiture of gods replace the first three, whereas the Golden Lotus is always included in the four. Although Water Margin, Three Kingdoms, The Journey to the West, and Concealing Deities or Investiture of Gods had gone through several times of second creations, the Golden Lotus is the only article which itself was a kind of spin-off story from the water margin. And it was also only one possible article written by only one author. And in these two features, Golden Lotus is outstanding in 5 of the 4 great rare stories, but all 5 are very long novels. Under the influence of 4 great rare stories of the Ming Dynasty, the following Qin period started to engender very long novels as well as huge collections of short stories. For instance, the very famous Dream of Red Maison or Red Mansion can represent the very long story in the Qin, whereas Liao Qi collection of Strange Things can do the latter. From the ending phase of Qin, we witnessed literally revolution in China. It started with a magazine called Xin Qingnian, published by Chen Duxiu, in order to educate Chinese people through poems and novels. For this magazine, many poems and stories were posted by those who were in abroad for study. For instance, Hu Xi and Lu Xian were one of the very active posters of the poems and stories, and Lu Xun's novel, Madman's Diary and True Legend of Chu, published in this particular magazine, were regarded as the foundation of Chinese modern literature or modern novels. So this is the end of the third part for the 8th lecture, which means the end of the 8th lecture as a whole. So see you again.